Merry meet everyone. Welcome back to Witches of the Moon, and welcome to season 7. I am your Wednesday host, Houston, and this week we are talking about shadow work. Um, there were two fantastic videos before me, Ava's and Rhiannon's. They did a great job in talking about how they work with shadow work and kind of like the basics of what shadow work is. Um, for me, I want to come at it or discuss um, what the shadow represents, the shadow self represents in my practice, and how I go about working with it and kind of melding it into my practice, if that makes any sense. Um, so the shadow self, or the shadow archetype, I have Google for some notes. The shadow archetype is the unconscious side of a personality that a person represses. This term was first coined up by Carl Jung, the renowned psychologist who practiced in the early 20th century. Um, it also says the shadow side, or the shadow self, is the unknown dark side of the personality. The shadow, in being instinctive and irrational, is prone to psychological projection, in which a perceived personal inferiority is recognized as a perceived moral deficiency in someone else. Um, so basically, with that being said, what my take on the shadow self is, for me, the shadow self, my shadow self, is made up of emotions that I have repressed, that I have pushed in the back of my mind, whether they are um, emotional trauma from my childhood. Even though I did have a great, I had a really good childhood, there are um, things that bring about a negative emotional response. Those things for me would be when I was taken to the hospital and when I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. For me, that is something that I don't like to think about. I don't like to think of the emotions that I was going through during that time. I don't really like to think of that year in high school. I don't really remember. Um, and that's just because I've repressed it. And I'm working through it. Um, I'm working through in my way of not letting this illness get the best of me, because the shadow side, if you don't um, work with it at some point, um, it can get the best of you. It can just come out and turn your life upside down. Um, and I mean that in a way where it's like your emotions just erupt, and you can't really control them, and um, it's just extremely chaotic. So for me, the best way that I go about working with my shadow, or my shadow self, and incorporating it, because it is a part of me, I look at it as a separate part of self. Like I have my higher self, and I have my shadow self, which is the lower aspect of me, and then the middle. So I think of things in more of the three worlds of shamanic practice, where you have the higher, the middle, and the lower. Neither of them are more important than the other. They are all cohesive in one unit. You need them all to work properly to become spiritually enlightened. Almost like the chakra system, but in a um, sense of self. So when I think of, or when I work with my shadow self, I like to journey. I like to meditate um, when I have a chance. And if I can't sit down and journey and go into a meditation to still my mind and follow along um, the path down into the underworld to work with my shadow, what I do is I write about it. I journal. Um, and if I've noticed that, especially working customer service in retail, a lot of stuff that usually doesn't or shouldn't, doesn't, um, that usually doesn't anger me, and some days infuriates me. Um, and I have to figure out why. Like, I have to take a step back when I get home, and it's like, Why was I mad at that? Like, why? Why is the ultimate question. So I write down the situation that I was in, and I write out um, my emotional response, and I write the question why, and I dig back in my memories, and it's like why would this make me mad, and I write as much as I can about it until I can't think of why I was mad anymore, until all of it's on paper. Um, or why do I feel a certain way? Like there was one that I have worked through. Um, this is fairly recent. The shadow self doesn't have to be anything like I said earlier from your childhood. It can be stuff that it's happened to you recently that you're still coping with. That could still be part of your shadow self. So I've had something that's happened to me that made me almost terrified to drive um, in the rain. What happened was I lost control of my car on the highway. It was raining. Me and my partner were heading home back to my hometown for Christmas or Thanksgiving, one of the two holidays that we were off, and he just had his back injections because my partner has a messed up back. His lower lumbar has two bulging discs, but I was doing the speed limit. It was raining pretty heavily when we left Charleston, and it was light rain, but the roads were wet. The highway was really wet. Like the storm came inland and went out to the coast to Charleston, and I was going towards inland, and we were driving about 60 miles an hour, so we were all under the speed limit, and it wasn't really bumper to bumper, but it was a steady flow in traffic. All of a sudden, this car speeds up beside me and cuts me off, and when I mean cuts me off, I only have like 2 feet in front of me to his bumper, and then he slams on brakes. This was back in my old car, which was a lot bigger than what I have now, and so I slammed on brakes, and I lost control of my car, and my car did multiple spins. I'm glad we didn't hit anybody. We didn't turn over. Um, and we went up into the side bank. And what basically stopped us was the mud and a tree branch. I was thankful that me and my partner only got away with he hit his head and his back was hurting, so they took him just to make sure on the safe side. And I was fine. Emotionally, I was a wreck. Um, I had to call the cops, of course, and I didn't get a ticket. The person kept going. Um, I had a lot of people stop and ask me if I was okay. Thankfully, I was close enough to Columbia where my parents could come and tow the car because I was in no state to drive after that. And so that instance um, is something that I didn't really like to think about, losing control of my car where I thought I had control over it. Um, it's not that my brakes were bad or my tires were bad. Um, I apparently just hit a slick spot in the road. But something like that can create a traumatic experience, and that's kind of what it was for me anyway. There are other people's stories that can be more traumatic, and this isn't a working on yourself and becoming more enlightened and dealing with your shadow aspect isn't oh, I've had this worse happen to me, um, so yours is kind of insignificant. No, there's nothing like that. When you're working with a shadow, everything, even if it seems insignificant to others, um, everything is important to work through. You don't want to push um, tiny things in the back of your mind just because um, you might think other people will think they're insignificant. It doesn't really matter what other people think. What only thing that matters when you're working on your shadow self or on any spiritual path is what you think and what you um, want to clear up and work through. So I had to do a lot of for that. I had to do basically slowed down a lot. For people who know me, I have kind of a lead foot when it comes to my driving, and unfortunately, a short time after that accident, the car was totaled. Not an accident; the engine block cracked, so it was totaled out that way. So I was no longer to drive it, and I got a new car that I have now. It's lower to the ground, so I don't have a big SUV. I have a smaller crossover, um, but still on rainy days, um, I just get really worked up. So that's something that I am continually working through. It's not something that's easily fixed, if you could say. That's just two of my personal stories on working with shadows. I know a lot of people, it's hard to talk about, and because it's extremely personal. I think everyone who works with their shadow or on, works on their shadow and kind of brings it, melds it together in their life. It is something that you really don't want to share with the world. That's why you repress it. But I felt that I should share an example, kind of two examples of mine, so you guys could kind of learn and understand kind of what the shadow aspect is. I know they kind of seem trivial, um, but to me they weren't. So it's something that I have to work through. You will never, ever be done working on your shadow or healing the shadow or melding the shadow with you, however you go about it. I see it more of when I look at my shadow self, I don't see a human. I visualize when I'm doing my shamanic journeys, I mostly deal with animal symbolism. So when I see my shadow self, I see my biggest fear. Um, and the thing that I don't want, want around me in animal form. And I see it weak, and I see it mangled, and I see it on the verge of death almost. And for me, that's a spider. Like I'm sharing that it's a spider. When I did do my journeys and working with my shadow self, I say that a lot, and I apologize. Um, but working with it, I've noticed that it's a spider, and every time that um, I need to work on my shadow self, spiders appear. Um, or I'll have spiders in my dreams, or I'll have flashes of spiders. They may not appear physically, but you'll see, like, you feel like there's something on you, like you just walk into a thing of webs and there's nothing there. That happens to me a lot. Um, but when I am in a meditation and journey process, and I want to work with my shadow and heal the emotional traumas of the past or any afflictions of my past life or whatever that is connected to my shadow at that time, because it's always different, and it's always something that, like I said, will be ongoing until I'm in the grave. Um, but I see the spider mangled, and what I do energetically is I see what's the energy that's around it, whether it's an emotional, kind of like a storyline, well, not like a storyline, but almost like what emotional trauma or what repressed event or what have you is attached to that spider at the moment that's making it, hurt, or it's making it broken, if they're kind of what it was, and go through and almost relive it, but from an objective standpoint. I like the way that Ava put it in her first one, that shadow work is done objectively. It is not done with the emotions, even though it deals with emotions, your emotions. It needs to be done with a objective point of view. You don't need to relive it. That is one thing you do not need to do. You need to be the onlooker and look at it from um, a place where you understand what happened, and you try to work on healing from that. You see what you can do to bring that memory up um, and heal. And then once you are working with it and healing the shadow self, you can then become fully integrated with your shadow self, which is there's like 2 points of view. It can be seen more as an animalistic, darker, more primal sense of self, which is what the lower world kind of represents, um, or it could just be the negative emotions, and you healing that and become one with yourself. Um, so, like I said, what I do is I journey, um, with the sole purpose of working with my shadow self, or I journal. I write everything down. Um, I have tried using divination, and I think I've only gotten. Sorry, my nose is itching. I'm getting a cold. Um, I've tried tarot cards and oracle cards, and they kind of help about a little bit, but not. They're just, they don't click with me when it comes to shadow work. I have tried working with scrying with a crystal ball and water, um, and that works. That works great. But I find that journeying and going into meditation and going through a journey and or writing, just like writing, like you're almost automatic writing, like your subconscious takes over and you just start writing everything down. That helps me out a lot. So, with that being said, I hope I shared my experiences with shadow work and how I deal with it and how I work with it efficiently. Um, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please leave them down below. Um, and like everyone else says, please check out check out the other hosts' video this week. There are going to be some awesome tips and topics about shadow work, and I look forward to a great season 7 with you guys. So, with that said, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week and many blessings.